After centuries of exile and dispersion, the Jewish people have returned to their biblical homeland. Over the past 3 decades, scores of communities have flourished in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, the heartland of this inheritance. Today, Arab and international pressure seeks to destroy these communities where tens of thousands of Jewish people dwell. This is a critical time. Israel's future hangs in the balance. The fate of the settlements in the heartland of biblical Israel will be decided in coming months. Christian Friends of Israeli Communities has responded to the challenge presented to Bible-believing Christians the world over to stand up in support of the Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Sandra Oster-Barris is the director of CFIC's Israel office. Sandra, a mother of 5 children, lives in the Samaria community of Karnei Shomron.
This is the heartland of biblical Israel. When we read the Bible, we read about the places of Elon Moreh and Shiloh and Hebron. We don't read about Tel Aviv. That's a modern city. But we read about these places. So when the Jews first came back to the land of Israel, it was only natural that they would establish communities here on the mountains of Judea and Samaria in the very heartland of biblical Israel. When God promised Abraham that the entire land that he saw before him, this land, would be promised to him and to his children forever as an everlasting possession. This was the beginning of Zionism. The land of Israel was promised by God to the Jewish people. The early Jewish nation came into the land of Israel, settled the land, and was an independent nation in this land for hundreds of years. 2,000 years ago, my people, the Jewish people, were exiled from the land of Israel and dispersed throughout the nations. But we never lost our dream and our hope and our conviction that one day God would enable us to return to this land because he promised. In the prophets, we read over and over again about the promise to return the Jewish people to the land of Israel after a period of exile. And so, just over 100 years ago, when Theodor Herzl first wrote the book, The Jewish State, and talked about the creation of a modern state of Israel, what he was doing was realizing the dreams and the hopes of centuries of the Jewish people. Jewish people who, for hundreds of years, prayed 3 times a day to return to Zion, to return to Israel. And beginning about 100 years ago, Jews actually started coming back to the land. Actually, there had always been Jews here in very small numbers. But about 100 years ago, Jews came back in larger numbers, and they came back with a new purpose, the purpose to develop this land, to settle this land, to reclaim it from the desert wastes, the barren landscapes that it had fallen to, and to turn it into a beautiful, productive land. There were many, many hardships along the way. But in 1948, the modern state of Israel was created. Created at the blessing of the United Nations, created against the wishes of the Arab nations that lived around us. And in 1948, 5 Arab armies invaded Israel, seeking to destroy the tiny state before it even had a chance to begin. Thank God they were not successful. And the new Jewish state was born, albeit in much smaller area than the biblical land of Israel. In the last 50 years, we've seen the return of exiles from all over the world. In recent years, we've seen communities, whole communities from the former Soviet Union and from Ethiopia coming back to Israel, a true ingathering of the exiles. In 1948, after Israel's War of Independence, the Arabs were not willing at that time to negotiate peace with us. They did not recognize the existence of the State of Israel. And that situation continued for a long time. In 1967, again, Israel was forced into war against her Arab neighbors. Israel was attacked from the areas that we now call Judea and Samaria, the areas that were then called by Jordan the West Bank. They were attacked from these areas. Israel responded, liberated these areas, and they became for the first time part of the State of Israel. These areas that had been actually the biblical heartland of the land of Israel, the places where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had walked, the places we read about in the Bible. The area that we call Judea and Samaria had been occupied by Jordan after the 1948 War of Independence. Jordan occupied it and annexed it and called the area the West Bank in order to declare to the entire world that Jordan saw this area as an integral part of Jordan. There was the East Bank of Jordan, which is Jordan as we know it today, and the West Bank of Jordan. However, that annexation was not recognized by any country in the world with the exception of Great Britain and Pakistan. And in 1967, that occupation came to an end. So in effect, when people today refer to this area as the West Bank, they are giving legitimacy to a claim that nobody really recognized ever, except Jordan and the other two nations I mentioned. And today no one recognizes it because even Jordan herself has renounced all claim to this area. We, the Jews who live here in Israel, in this area, are proud to call this area Judea and Samaria because this is what the area is referred to in the Bible. After 1967, most of the area was empty. There were Arabs living in a number of cities, but beyond the cities, most of the landscapes had not been developed. One of the first areas to be settled after the '67 war was the area of Gush Etzion. This is an area just south of Jerusalem where Jewish settlements had actually existed in the 40s. In 1948, these settlements were overrun by the Arabs and vanquished, their residents massacred or taken prisoner to Jordan. The children of these martyrs in Gush Etzion came back after 1967 to reestablish their communities in the very same place that they had existed before the '48 war. That was the beginning. Since then, we have Jewish settlements throughout the area. Hebron, the biblical city, the capital, the first capital of Israel under King David, where King David had his throne for 7 years, where the cave of Machpelah is situated, where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives are buried. Jews first came back to this city in 1968. And today, we have a small Jewish community in the heart of Hebron and a much larger community, Kiryat Arba, just along its outskirts. Additional communities were developed south of Hebron, in the hills between Beersheba and Hebron, the very area where Abraham and Isaac walked back and forth as they traveled between Beersheba and Hebron.